We are now recording. Hello. Hey, friends, welcome here. Happy February. Happy February to all. Welcome to Remake's February community call. Welcome here, friends. Thank you for joining us live today. And if you're watching this recording in the future, hello to you too. And thank you for being here. If you've attended our calls before, you know how we kick it off. Drop in the chat where you're dialing in from today. Where in the world are you guys? I'm reporting live from New York. It's Monday afternoon. My name is Holly. I'm Remake's community manager. Welcome, everyone. Hey, Philly. Nice to see ya. Fellow New York, hello, hello. If this is your first call with us, welcome. We meet on the first Monday of every month, together in community under Remake's mission to unite changemakers in the fight for human rights and climate justice in the clothing industry. Anyone can join, share, and make change as a remaker. This is an accessible movement for all, with connections to like-minded, sustainable fashion advocates all over the world. Remake is a nonprofit advocacy organization, so if you enjoy our programming, please consider making a donation today to help sustain our operations. Hello, everyone. Welcome to February. Let's get into it. This might be the February call, but we're going to start with a little recap of January. Shout out to the New York City Hub for partnering with Climate Cafe on 2 back-to-back events, fundraising well over $400 for Remake, Mutual Aid LA Network, Medical Aid for Palestinians, the New York Immigration Coalition, and National Network of Abortion Funds at their inauguration response community care events. The latter named Visions of Hope, Crafting a Future Beyond Crisis. Both were a place to imagine a better world as we progress into 2025. As you can see here, they began with a meditation on hope for the future and then created small group collages with what our future could look like using radical imagination. They then used these collages to talk about shared driving values and goals to then discuss how to achieve them. Both events included a yoga wind down, bringing intention back into the body and ready to take on the world. In the wake of the fires in California and Trump's inauguration, gathering in community rooted in justice and compassion is needed now more than ever. Collective action is the future, and that is what today's conversation will be all about with our guest speakers. Devastating fires tore through Los Angeles and Ghana's Kantamanto market last month. Families lost homes, businesses were destroyed, and communities were left devastated. In LA, clothing donation centers were overwhelmed with 50,000 pounds extra piles of unusable clothing, a reflection of our fast fashion culture. In Kantamanto, a fire tore through one of the world's largest secondhand markets, where discarded clothes from the global north already create mountains of waste daily. These crises are not isolated. They are deeply connected to overconsumption, waste, and the climate emergency. I am pleased to welcome our first guests of the call today from SUAY Sew Shop in Los Angeles to share about the LA fire disaster relief and their broader initiatives. Joining us today is sumaq, Head of Culture and Resource Mobilization, and Sophie Strauss, one of SUAY's closest collaborators, who has been instrumental in helping engage and mobilize the fashion sector. Hello, sumaq and Sophie. Thank you for joining us today. I'm so grateful to have the opportunity to speak with you for such a critical conversation amongst our community of ambassadors and our network in the sustainable fashion industry. I'd love to welcome you and have you start off with telling us a little bit about yourselves.
Thanks so much for having us. Sumaq, do you want to introduce yourself first, or should I go first?
Go for it.
Hi, I'm Sophie. I'm actually a stylist. I call myself a stylist for regular people. I'm based here in Los Angeles, and sustainability is a really big core of what I do. And through working with clients who are really interested in changing how they relate to both their clothes on a personal level, but also how they relate to this industry on a global production and consumption level, I have forged a really, really beautiful relationship with the team at SUAY. They've been an incredible resource. And what I've found really powerful about working with SUAY is that I find there's a lot of no's, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, when we talk about the kind of, behaviors that are causing problems in our society. And it can be very depressing and sort of, it can really like kind of stop people in their tracks. And I've found that having SUAY, not just as a place for people to have a more sustainable place to put their kind of like textile overflow, their donated clothes that they're clearing out from their closet, but also as a place where they can understand in really concrete terms what something better could look like, right? We need that positive example, because people often lack the imagination to like think of those systems themselves, and SUAY is that system. So that's why I'm so excited to work with them. And I'm going to toss it to Sumaq.
Thank you so much, Sophie. We're so lucky to have you with us. Hi, everyone. My name is Sumaq Alvarado del Águila. I am an immigrant, indigenous woman identified person, originally from Peru, and have been living in Los Angeles, and I call Los Angeles home since 2006. I have over 2 decades of experience as an organizer, dedicated to overcoming systemic barriers and also building community and solidarity. I come from philanthropy, nonprofit, and cultural strategy, and I have been able to just work with various different networks and organizations, linking a strong like solidarity work, using cultural programming to like really push forward social change as a whole. Most specifically in the so-called fashion sector, SUAY is my first official experience besides working in the stockroom at Old Navy back when I was a young person. And at SUAY, like pretty much like our commitment to regenerative and circular economies that are based in solidarity, that centers workers and solidarity-based solutions are pretty much something that really keeps me excited and engaged. As an indigenous cultural producer, I'm always trying to figure out how do we protect, repair, invest, and transform, and put forward like frameworks that like really solidify practices that place people over profit, from below and to the left. Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much. You're definitely in the right community here today. I'm so grateful to ask you some questions that I have, and just having SUAY see waste as an opportunity. I have a question. How does the overwhelming amount of clothing donations in LA right now highlight the systemic issues that we have around fashion waste and unwanted clothing for both of you?
Yeah, I think we were, talking about this, and I'm born and raised in Los Angeles. This is like extremely close to home. I have so many friends who lost their childhood homes, clients who lost their homes. And it was very surreal because I was actually not in Los Angeles when the fires happened. So I was watching it all through my phones, as many of us were, which is famously very good for your brain. And I remember feeling like I watched in real time this like essentially top-down response to a disaster. And I watched right, which was everybody feeling genuine panic, compassion, fear, chaos, all of those things, and going, what can I do? Right? I feel anxious. I feel scared. What can I do? And I think genuinely coming from like a really beautiful place, but falling along that well-worn path of this sort of overproduction, overconsumption, capitalistic top-down approach to everything, which ironically is a huge contributor to how we got in this mess, right? So I watched in with unbelievable speed pop up donation centers, pop up this, pop up that, bring your this, bring your that. And suddenly there was, I just saw like through my phone mountains and mountains and mountains of clothes and all of these donation centers, some of which are really experienced places, experienced mutual aid organizations, city or government run like council offices who very quickly started turning away donations. And then I saw all of the very organic and well-intentioned sort of like small businesses and just people with followings who are kind of like, I'm going to open a free store too, suddenly being like, no more clothes, no more clothes were the first thing. They were like, no more clothes, no more clothes, no more clothes. And I was like, oh no, we're going to have a second crisis. And to be totally honest, I was not at the time familiar with the fact that this is a studied phenomenon, the sort of the disaster after the disaster. And what I just felt was this really reminds me of not just the really glaring issues, which are overproduction and overconsumption of everything, but particularly clothing, textiles, and garments, especially in the age of fast fashion, where the worth of those garments has gone, is essentially zero. And I will toss that to sumaq in a bit to talk about the sort of value of clothes. But that it was also really following this like charity versus solidarity structure, that there's this assumption that, or it's not even an assumption, right? It's like it's socialized into us that when there is a time of need, you don't stop and ask, okay, what do the people who are experiencing this want? What are they asking for? What do they need? It flows along those power dynamics, no matter what the situation is. So it's like, well, I have power. My home didn't, burn down. I have my stuff. So I'm going to be good and just go through my closet and clean a bunch of stuff out. And that immediately started causing this textile overflow. And then secondarily, when people started to notice that, the first message I saw come out was don't donate trash, which was necessary on some level, maybe, right? Like, my God, I was talking to people who were at these donations facilities and even talking to, my friends at SUAY, hearing like, we're getting literal trash, right? Dirty, torn, gross things, sure. But it really obscured the core issue. And I found that alarming as well, which is it creates this very individualistic identifying of the problem, right? It's not, oh, hey, we need to really hit pause and rethink how do we respond to a time of crisis? How do we respond to people in need, both when it's a big flashy moment like a fire or a really, really quiet moment like Los Angeles's astronomical housing crisis? And we tend, you even see this in the responses. It's like, well, if there's overflow, just bring it to a homeless shelter. And it's kind of like, okay, no, 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 no. Right. So the don't donate trash thing, I would see these posts go around and every comment is like, I can't believe these awful, cruel people. It's so disgusting to use this moment to offload your trash, and then it was like, no, this is actually not supposed to be an opportunity for you to absolve yourself and point your finger at some other unknown person who you're imagining like went to their, the Goodwill bag in the back of their car and was like, oh, finally, and tossed it off, right? It's actually all of us. It is really all of us. And that part of what happens with overproduction and overconsumption is that it doesn't matter if you threw a goddamn Birkin in the pile. If nobody wants it and it's in the context of mounds and mounds and mounds of textiles, it becomes trash because you've absolved yourself of responsibility for that thing because you've passed it on, but it doesn't have a new owner. And now it's sort of floating in this like liminal space. And so at this point, and this again, all like was like a 2-3 day thing, I reached out to SUAY and because they were starting to say like, hey guys, we're over here. This is actually what we do, right? Right. Instead of tapping into existing organizations, existing businesses that really know how to handle moments like this, everybody's sort of putting themselves at the center of this moment and trying to solve it without experience, without insight, without inroads. this is what we do, and we do it ethically, top to bottom. We do it ethically from an environmental standpoint. We're not shipping stuff across anywhere. It's all here. We're not no shipping, right? We do it ethically from a labor standpoint, right? We have a dignified workforce here who is all right on site. They're not obscured from view, right? And we've been doing this for years. We know how to do this, but, and this is critical, it's not free. You're not giving us a gift of your donated textiles. We are taking on labor so that you don't have to deal with them. And that is a major public education, political education issue that I really thought was like, okay, people don't understand this. How do we take advantage of this window where people are paying attention and get that message in, and then also get SUAY funding to actually take on this overflow? And so that's where we came up with this Sponsor a Bag campaign, which was quick. It was like, hey, look, we're all kind of scared about this, right? Especially anybody who's like even dabbled in sustainable fashion kind of stuff. You can't just drop your bags off at SUAY and go, phew. You have to pay for that. And even better, what if you pay for that so that the folks at the Day Laborer Network, so that the folks at the Pasadena Job Center who are in the streets every single day doing this work don't have to pay for your runoff that you did, right? How do we actually sort of socialize this? So we created this pot, and it was funny because you even see in that campaign how people don't understand this. They're like, so wait, I'm buying a bag and then do I keep the bag? What do I do with the bag? And it's like, no, it's not a literal bag. It's a it is a literal bag because it's a unit of measurement, but it's a metaphorical bag, right? You're not just paying for how much textile waste can fit in a bag. It's about 20 pounds, $20 for 20 pounds in a bag. But you are investing in the kind of system we actually need to exist so that we don't get in this problem in the first place. And so that's really what this Sponsor a Bag campaign that kind of emerged out of this is it's not just reactive, but actually investing in something that ideally would be able to be proactive. And I'm going to toss it to Sumaq to kind of deepen our relationship with clothing.
Thank you, Sophie. I think something that is also worth thinking about. So when people were posting about don't donate trash, the poor quality of the clothing, and I think like something that we have to realize that not many of us know. Like, for example, the Kantamanto community in Accra, Ghana, faces this crisis every single day, right? So the only difference here is that it's become like its own economy, where big exporters of textile waste are making money off of folks, that have become dependent. They buy like a bale of unwanted clothing from the US for about $200, and they have no idea about the quality, the condition until after they have bought that pile and they get to go sort through it, and this is an entire operation, like the exporting of our waste. And like they have no avenue for returning what they cannot sell, like they're stuck with it. And that's why we see like the beach. I don't know if anyone has seen the images of the beaches in Accra, like they're completely filled with textile waste. So if it wasn't already clear to you all, like the situation is like the reality or the fact is that the global north has too much clothing, and that this clothing is considered disposable, So the surplus of clothing that has been donated, like in an undignified condition, is pretty much like being offered to folks that potentially have experienced the worst days of their lives, during this fire. But we also have to realize that this can also be a signal that perhaps we've forgotten how to show up for one another, just as humans. And 100% like clothing donations are a thing. But I also believe that in the US especially, it's become like a lazy excuse for broader participation and activation and mobilization. And this is learned behavior, it's a collective learned behavior that all of us have normalized. And we don't know that these charities such as Goodwill, like they profit off of this, they're profiting off of it, and are being part of this unjust, unresponsible, textile waste exporting scheme. Is like all part of it. So I think like that we really need to kind of have to shift that narrative that textile recycling is simple, like that it's almost like when we throw our trash away, we don't see it anymore, it disappears, right? But it doesn't disappear. And textile waste is really hard and labor intensive to go through it and to sort it, and there's a lot of like expertise that need to go through it. So I think like the overwhelming amount of clothing donations that were obvious during this crisis is only like a signal that, yeah, something that we've known all along, that we have too much clothing, and we keep pumping out an endless oversupply of more clothes. And if we are truly committed in reducing production volumes, and like trying to figure out a way of how to redistribute or make new things out of whatever is already there, like I think little by little we can start getting to the source of the issue. And I think like us as individual consumers, we can be responsible owners by one, making sure that we take care of the garments that we do own, but then we also like hit these corporations with that in their pocket where it matters the most. So like stop consuming, stop buying, and like figure out ways of how to like maybe source from more. And when I say like ethically or sustainable, I mean it, because a lot of people, and this is why I often don't jump on the wagon of like talking about fast fashion, because to me it's like, yeah, fast fashion is one of it, but even if you buy an Everlane that is so-called sustainable, you're still part of the problem because you're still consuming. So yeah, so how do we figure out a way on not getting into this mess again?
Thank you for sharing that, Sumaq and Sophie both, and hearing the responses to the bag program. It's, a lot of people still are, thousands of people still are in this learning phase of the impact that they have when they purchase and discard their clothing. On the website for SUAY, you have recycled 4 million pounds of textiles since program inception. Can you share a little bit about the labor that goes into processing and recycling these items, and why funding, especially going into 2025, is so important?
Yeah, definitely. So this is since the inception of SUAY, right? So we started in 2017. We began the actual program, I think, in 2018, the textile recycling program. So recycling over 4 million pounds of textiles, because we're still counting, because we're recycling every single day, is something that just doesn't just happen, right? It's the result of meticulous hands-on labor and a commitment to intentional practices that always prioritize sustainability over convenience. So unlike traditional recycling methods, which often relied on automated or chemical processes, the reality of handling textile waste requires human touch. So the majority of today's clothing is made of mixed fibers or low quality materials that sort of like make it really impossible to utilize the traditional recycling systems like machinery and chemical and all of those things that make manual recycling essential pretty much. So at SUAY, like every single garment is touched by various people in the sorting process, analyzed, and then reimagined. So we carefully sort each piece, assessing whether it can be repaired, repurpose or transform into something entirely new, or maybe set aside for a later time when we figure out what to do with it, you know? So this process is not just labor intensive, but it's a skill. It's a skill, it's a craft, and one that sustains an incredible team of skilled manual laborers whose expertise lies in redefining waste into wearable and functional pieces. So it doesn't just stop at the environmental benefit. That is a lot of what people in sustainability kind of like speak about, but it's also a driver of equity and opportunity, because we are an LA-based company that supports and sustains and gives jobs to about 50 individuals, 50 Angelinos. And these are fair wages. We foster community participation and partnership. And we are really trying to champion circular economy, that in the process, we're really trying to address like systemic issues within not just the fashion industry, but many industries that use skilled manual labor. You know, a lot of these folks come from strategically marginalized communities that are often at the mercy of scrupulous practices that provide like poverty wages and really poor working conditions. So we're trying to really flip that model, and really put out the skilled manual labor. One of our taglines is manual labor is skilled labor, right? So we believe that in 2025, we're gonna really try to see how do we continue this groundbreaking work, and that by showing like, you know, how justice-led sustainable textile recycling can be a blueprint for environmental and social justice, just so that we don't just think of fabric and textiles as something disposable, but, you know, that garments can find a new purpose and that we can create like beautiful new pieces with what you once thought was trash.
Is it all right if there's just a couple, I feel like there's a couple questions in the chat
Sure.
that I think just I would love to address, because this comes up a lot, which is this idea that like the solution to a problem is one thing, right? Like we all need to stop buying fast fashion, or we all need to stop buying new clothes or whatever. And I think in the era of like the TED Talk and whatever, we love the idea that there's like this one cute trick to solve all our problems. And the truth is, it has to be like all the levers, and that can be really overwhelming. But hopefully it also kind of inspires you to recognize, and this is part of what I love about what I do, is that I get to kind of like post a cute outfit video and then get people who are maybe not thinking about sustainable fashion or thinking about this stuff into the conversation. And then, as I think all of us know here, you can't talk about any of these issues. You can't talk about anything like this without having to talk about something else, right? You can't care about fashion if you don't care about, you know, labor justice, if you don't care about the environment, if you don't care about like, you know, fat liberation, if you don't care about trans rights and gender, right, like gender expression. You can't really genuinely deeply participate in these conversations if you're not engaging with those. And so, you know, you're correct, right? The answer is not going to be that we all just stop buying clothes. And especially, by the way, like I think, again, this LA moment was such a like microcosm of what's happening on a global scale. It was sort of like, oh my God, people need stuff. And boy, did everyone load up their Amazon carts, right? And it's like, okay, what if instead of that, you went to your local hardware store and grabbed as many masks as you could get, right? Just we don't think of that anymore, right? This sort of convenience, and in fairness to everyone, like the true monopolies of these massive corporations that are really hard to avoid, genuinely. But I think, you know, I honestly can't stop thinking about how much the fire kind of brought the global south to Los Angeles just for like a fleeting moment, right? That Los Angeles for a brief moment had the kind of textile buildup that they have in Ghana because of what we usually ship over there. I can't separate the images of burnt down homes from what it looks like in Gaza to have your home buried in rubble, right? And to see messages from people I know in Gaza and people I know in Los Angeles saying all my memories are gone. And the circumstances are wildly different. But regardless, I think what it does is it reminds us that eventually all of our foreign policies will come home to roost, right? And so what that's to say is it's not just, okay, we're going to all stop buying clothes and then we're kind of tapping out of this issue. It's okay, yeah, we're doing that and we're joining a local mutual aid organization. We're plugging into something, right? That I know it's corny, but it's like, yeah, we can't do everything, but all of us can do a little of something. And it's this really beautiful way to start engaging on a wider, right, that how wonderful that you can't escape this. And I think the last thing I'll say, and this is something I love about SUAY, is that they center the workers, right? And something that, like, the first time I ever heard sumaq speak, I'm a fangirl, sorry. So, but she was on this panel and she looked a sustainable fashion panel. And she looked around and she goes, "Where are the workers? Where are the workers?" And it's crazy that we never think of that, right? And by we, I mean like a lot of like white, fancy, or middle up to middle upper class people, right? Whatever, those of us lucky enough to live in a fancy city or whatever, who don't do manual labor ourselves, maybe, you know? And so if you're talking about, okay, well, what does it look like? Right? We don't want to hurt all of these workers in the global south. We don't want to hurt all those workers right here in LA. I mean, the Garment Worker Center of downtown Los Angeles is a massively important organization here. So what does it look like to center that, right? It's not just like throwing them a bone. They're the leaders of this, right? Those of us out here who are not working in factories every day, making the clothes, probably shouldn't be in charge of the legislation and the restructuring. So going, okay, what do you guys want? Because the truth is, workers want to make money and make a living, of course, but they want to work in ethical conditions, and ethical conditions and this rate of production are mutually exclusive. You cannot have both. But you can't have ethical working conditions and, slower fashion production if we don't fight for things like universal health care, right? Because what does that mean? If you're not getting your health care from a job that's not paying you enough and you have to do those things, right? Like, we have to work on a whole system that actually supports people so that we can make these adjustments. And that can be really daunting. So I'm not saying like, you guys got to fix the whole world and then we'll have, but just that, don't lose sight of that, right? It's not so small. So that's what I wanted to say.
Can I?
Thank you so much, Sophie.
have
Yes.
Additional
Sumaq.
thing. So because I did see the questions. Thank you, Sophie, for being so on top of it. But I think like so the fact is that we have too much clothing, right? That's a fact. This is only a negative thing because we keep pumping out an endless oversupply of more clothes. But potentially it could be a good thing, right? So if we remain committed to reducing production volumes and displacing new clothes with upcycled clothes, our too much will no longer be a burden and like become an abundance, right? So we must learn this. And everything that the overproduction has contributed to the LA fires will remain linked to the burden, that has been left globally, because it's not just in Cantamanto, but you go south, like you go to the Atacama Desert in Chile, you see the same thing, right? Where there's like piles and piles and piles of clothes, our clothes, being shipped overseas without like adequate resources to mitigate fire risks or to respond holistically to market disasters, of the magnitude that we saw in Cantamanto. And lastly, someone asked about the brokerage. I don't know much about it, but what I do know is that it's an entire money-making system, that involves like baling and shipping textile waste. It's very intricate in how it works, but usually it involves like intermediaries who are coordinating between like textile waste generators, like your Goodwill, of like the US and collection centers or even manufacturers, because actual brands like that use factories, sometimes they have textile waste of stuff that never made it out of, or was never sold or never whatever, you know? So it's post-consumer and then also just brand new stuff. And so these intermediaries are working between them, the buyers, which include like recycling facilities, upcycling organizations, and exporters. And the brokers often assess the condition, because the piles are like sorted by like new, post-consumer, then the type of like t-shirts and whatnot. And then there's type and volume, and then this determines the marketability, like the profitability, how much money can we make, and then the suitable destinations, right? And then once all of that is evaluated, then like we start like negotiating the sale based on the demand, and then we export, like we like take it all around the world, make it send it in ships. Yeah, it's like an entire intricate network, money making. People are profiting over your trash. You take it to your local donation center and you think, oh, this thing is going to go to like people that need it. But guess what? That's not always the case.
Thank you so much, Sumaq and Sophie. I have chills in this conversation. Our chat is fired up. This community is so excited to have this conversation with you today. And thank you for answering the questions that are in the chat. I think advocating for infrastructure in the global north to support our own waste is so integral. These conversations now, and reparations for the global south through physical and monetary support as well. And building collective power where we are rather than working individually. Thank you two so much for joining. It's time to rethink how we produce, consume, donate, and care for the planet and our immediate communities. We need systems that restore ecosystems, reduce waste, and build resilience. So from that conversation, I'm now really excited to invite Jess Quelennec, tell me if I'm saying your last name wrong, to our virtual stage. Thank you. Jess is a Remake Ambassador, a social entrepreneur, and founder of Osei Collective, a pioneering nonprofit dedicated to empowering entrepreneurs with disabilities in Ghana to achieve economic independence. With a wealth of global work experience spanning 4 continents, Jess brings deep expertise in cultural intelligence, inclusive strategies, and the intersection of social impact and the fashion industry. I met Jess earlier this month at our January Changemaker social, and I just needed to speak with her more. Hi, Jess. I would love to invite you now to our virtual stage and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you and Osei Collective and what is how you were brought to Accra to found it.
Thank you. Yes, thank you so much, Holly. And it's pronounced Quelennec, but you were so close, so I appreciate that.
Thank you.
So hello, everybody, and it's just so good to be part of this community. It's also really reassuring during this time in our world that we all have like this common vision and, you know, where we can put social impact at the forefront. It's not just aspirational. I think we can all activate it in our own small way. As Holly introduced me, I'm Jess. I'm a social entrepreneur. I'm based out of Accra, Ghana. I'm also the founder of Osei Collective. We are focused on empowering persons with disability in Ghana. I've actually worked in the luxury fashion industry for 13 years in the people and culture space. And it was only 6 months ago that I actually traded my job in Canada and I moved to Ghana and really just focused on the social impact work. So I developed this NGO in 2022 and I wanted to just be on the ground and, you know, do this work really. I think the personal drive for me and the mission that I have was informed by my experience in the people and culture space and certainly in the fashion industry. I think in the last decade, just how can I ignite untapped human potential in some way, particularly marginalized communities. And I think disabled people in the region have disability and poverty that reinforce and perpetuate each other. So there are constant barriers, stigmatization, discrimination when it comes to accessing fundamental needs like healthcare, education, employment, and a lot of, disabled persons will beg on the streets to survive. And if they're not begging on the streets, they will often, set up their own small businesses or small scale businesses to survive. They become traders, vendors, and they will sell at markets that are much like the Kantamanto market in Ghana, which I'm happy to share more about, Holly.
Yes, please. Thank you so much for joining today and sharing your firsthand experience in Ghana and in Accra specifically. I'd love if you could share the impact of the Kantamanto market in your community and how you see the effect and impact on your specific community that you serve.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think that there's so many, it's really a ripple effect. And I think, like you mentioned earlier, Kantamanto market, for those who are not aware, it is one of the largest secondhand markets in the world. They sell secondhand clothes and they have been reselling secondhand clothes since the 1980s. So this fire burnt to the ground on the 2nd of Jan, and people lost, their businesses, their livelihoods. And there were injuries too, and unfortunately, quite a lot of individuals don't even have basic healthcare. So you can only imagine how that has turned out. A lot, as I mentioned earlier, I think a lot of the survival methods for persons with disabilities are just to sell in the market. The challenge is though, and it's what Sumaq mentioned really around that, traders do not, there are 30,000 local traders. They will buy from the global north. They are based in Kantamanto market. It's not free to them. They buy these bales of secondhand clothing, of discarded clothing, and it ultimately, it becomes their livelihood. So they are then basically responsible for feeding their families and supporting themselves, selling clothes that in whatever condition it comes in, making a living. And the clothes don't stop coming in. There are more than 15 million pieces each week coming in from the global north. So not only are they responsible for recirculating secondhand items when they work, but it is also very undignified and is the only way often, for them to survive and make a living. I'm not sure if you know this, but for historical context, and I think someone did mention or ask the question about how it came to this, but Ghana was essentially forced to open its market to foreign imports back in the 80s. And then today, with this continuous rise of fast fashion and this complex model that is, literally collapsing, the global fashion industry production increases year on year. And so we're left with this pile, this heap of clothing that then impacts individuals who, are in these situations. So I just want to touch on what Sophie mentioned earlier around donations. And I think, we often have the best intention with donating clothing and we have been fed, that it is doing it for a good deed. The reality is it ends up in a heap here, and the pile is just an illustration of the impact of the excessive textile waste because of our overconsumption, really, typically in the global north. And, it becomes a problem that locals have to deal with. And fashion companies have pushed this, narrative that, reassuring consumers that sustainability is happening and you can keep on consuming without feeling guilty about the clothes that you're throwing away, essentially. But the reality is that we've seen the impact now. There was and there has been a very poor infrastructure in Kantamanto market. It's been that way for years. This is also not the first of the fires. There have been fires before because there is so much textile waste. It's been an influx. There are bales in containers that also were burnt down. There are people who have had, a lot of their homes there. Some people sleep there too, in the market. They wake up very early in the morning, 4 a.m., and they get to work. So, these are individuals in some of the most vulnerable situations. As I mentioned before, also no access to healthcare. So I think, in short, the fire, this crisis, it absolutely underscores the broader systemic inequalities that are the injustices faced by marginalized communities because of the global fashion industry. And, I think the fact is that it did not receive as much attention, maybe media attention or the significant attention. And, not to compare this a lot to Los Angeles fires, but typically it's happening in the global south. It was, maybe not as poignant in the news, but I think it just, again, goes to show that marginalized communities continue to be marginalized. And the fire went slightly unnoticed, and it reflects the disparity really in public awareness and resource allocation. So I do want to just shout out because I feel like I'm rambling on, but shout out to the All Foundation. They are on the ground. They are working really hard with the traders, the local traders, and they've actually already raised $1.2 million of their 5 million goal for the fire relief efforts in Cantamanto. So if there is any way that you can support or give or do any of your part to kind of support, them getting back on track and building a better infrastructure to unfortunately manage what will likely continue to be an influx of clothing coming in because there are no restrictions, laws, or policies to stop this. But yes, essentially just having a better infrastructure for them to continue to sell and have a livelihood. So, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, to folks on the call, Remake has a great relationship with the OR Foundation. And speaking to what Sumaq and Sophie had mentioned earlier in this call, it's lifting up the voices of the people on the ground and what they need, not necessarily what we think they need, but lifting up the demands of what these worker partners that we have need in the moment is the best way for us to support and move forward. So thank you, Jess. And I just have one last question for you before we transition to our next speaker. But being on the ground where you are and in the aftermath of this, how do you empower yourself with your empowering incredible individuals with disabilities in your very purpose-driven adventure in Ghana?
Oh, yes. I think it's really easy at times like this to feel really hopeless. And I think empowering others through the work that we do is, I don't know, I'm really driven by a mission for me. And that's, for me, it's really about making sure that untapped individuals' human potential is seen. And I think the work that we do is just to focus on uplifting and empowering those who are the most marginalized. I think that we come together, we commune a lot, and I think that's really important. I think we are people, I think Africans in general are people that, thrive in community. And it's very important to come together and be together and support those and support each other, particularly those who really have nothing and have lost a lot. So I think continuing to do the work, reaching out to our members and supporting our community is vital at this time. And that keeps me uplifted and motivated, to be honest with you, because it just further makes me feel like, okay, there is a reason for, why I'm here. And it feels like you can see the action on the ground. It isn't just something that you disperse somewhere into the ether. It's actually here. You can go every day, you can talk to the people, and you can feel that they are empowered by the fact that you care and you're showing a sense of care for, what they're going through. So yes, I hope that answers your
Thank you.
question.
That was a beautiful answer. And I think that care, that feeling ties really nicely into our next speaker, who is here to show us the upcoming continuation of her community care event series. It's called Love is a Verb. And this could be an example of an event, what it could look like in your cities where everyone is located today as we approach Valentine's Day and consider it from a community impact lens. So Gigi, I'd love to invite you up. Gigi Gruenburg is a Remake Ambassador, an artist and sustainability activist based in Detroit and Brooklyn, primarily working with textiles and beadwork. Inspired by a background in Waldorf teaching, she created a series of themed handwork and maker parties using repurposed and sustainable materials entitled From Our Hands, an intention of community-led creative expression. Welcome, Gigi.
Thank you, Holly.
I would love to have you share a little bit about your experience with creating From Our Hands.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you everyone here and to the previous speakers, Jess, sumaq, and Sophie. I'm so inspired by your work and so grateful to be here with you. My name's Gigi. I founded From Our Hands last year as a continuation of my climate advocacy journey. And like Holly said, in short, it's a community-centered handwork and maker party series using all sustainable and repurposed materials. I source the majority of my materials from secondhand organizations, thrift stores, antique markets, garage sales, wherever else I can find them, in the hope to keep them out of this donation cycle that contributes to so much waste and disaster in the world. I mostly have my Remake New York hub to thank for the inspiration, collaboration, and support behind this project. It's also a continuation of my previous organizing work with Sunrise Movement, as Holly mentioned, my work with Waldorf Education, which has such a strong focus on handwork in their curriculum, my education in the social sciences and international affairs, and as well as this super unique 9-month artist intensive course I took in 2022 and 2023. But really it's a focus on like the joy and the fun that can exist in climate advocacy alongside all of the big existential, technical, scientific things that we are dealing with. So it was very inspired by Remake. And also, to be completely candid, it was inspired a lot by my anxiety around these multi-crises that we experience, whether firsthand or through our phones or the news or whatever it is. I was feeling a lot of political and climate anxiety, which drove me to rely really heavily on my own handwork, namely knitting, to soothe. And I was inspired to bring people together to do the same with me. So with this project, I've kind of like carved out my own way of making repurposed, recycled, reimagined materials into art together with community. At its core, From Our Hands seeks to answer the question, can sustainability and climate work, which we all know are these like massive, huge questions and issues and problems that we face politically, socially, but can they also be small and communal and beautiful and fun? Can it be about something as simple as making your own Valentines, your own holiday gifts, or something that you'd otherwise purchase with your hands and alongside community? It's really an exploration of the relationship between individual creation and the broader community. And as Holly mentioned, last February was when we launched with our Love is a Verb party, which was in collaboration with fellow Remake ambassadors and their joint ventures, Synergy Social, Climate Cafe, and Rosie's magazines. This party took place at the start of Fashion Week in New York and was an advocacy-based fundraiser for grassroots organizations helping provide aid to families in Gaza. We raised over $900 for these organizations, Care for Gaza, Connecting Gaza, and Sulala Animal Rescue. Since then, I've thrown a few more parties with some of the photos here that Holly has shared. We've done a jewelry making party. I've done a few pop-ups in Detroit, and most recently a holiday party inspired by Martha Stewart. Because I'm splitting my time between Detroit and New York, some parties are in either city depending on where they're planned. But up next, we have our very special second Love is a Verb party in Ridgewood, Queens on February 15th. And it is the day after Valentine's Day on purpose, because the focus of it isn't on the holiday itself, but rather it emphasizes the importance of community-centered care and love in action. So this one is again in collaboration with Synergy Social, Climate Cafe, Remake, and Rosie's magazines. And this time we have a more detailed and interactive facilitation planned, which we're all really excited about. We'll be grounding ourselves in our creative gifts personally, as well as collectively. We'll be having a Skillshare speed dating round, which I'm super excited about. And then, of course, crafting with all repurposed and sustainable materials. We'll have a bake sale as well. And again, it will be a fundraiser for Care for Gaza, Mutual Aid LA, New York Immigration Coalition, and of course, Remake. And while I'm kind of like, you know, From Our Hands is my project, it would not be possible without my collaborators, both in and outside the Remake community, although I'm always trying to recruit everybody into Remake. And going forward, we will be doing parties, and I will also be launching a unique product soon to make it possible for anyone to do their own party anywhere and anytime. And you can find us on Instagram at FromOurHands_ and Gigi.Junior. And if you're interested in collaborating in any way, please reach out, because I'm always kind of trying to find new ideas for parties and new inspiration. It's like a really exciting way for me to just be creative and keep things out of the donation cycle, you know?
Thank you so much, Gigi. I'm so excited to see all that From Our Hands has going on this year in 2025 and beyond. So, gang, we have come to the close of our February community call. I hope you've learned a good deal today and feel inspired to make a difference locally and globally. If you're interested in creating an event like we discussed earlier in the call, or that Gigi mentioned, or if you have an idea for virtual panels or workshops, please feel free to fill out the Remake event form and let us know. We want to hear from you. We want to highlight you. And we have a list of upcoming events on our website for the month of February. If you have an event to contribute, again, fill out that event form so we can share and other ambassadors can find out what you're doing. I'm going to make a plug quickly for our next upcoming Changemaker Social, which will be on February 20th. We just started doing these and we had a really great time at the one in January. Like I said, that's where I met Jess. So I hope to see you all there. Allison has been wonderful at dropping the links in the chat here. And lastly, we'll see you again here next month for our March community call. It'll be March 3rd, same time. And we'll be working around International Women's Day themes. So stay tuned to the speakers and programming that we'll have for that. Thank you again to our speakers, and thank you for dropping your contact in the chat. Let's keep the conversation going. This is just, you know, the kickstart, and I look forward to remaining in touch. And I'll see you soon, guys. Thank you. Happy February. Bye. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.